In the widely beloved season 8 of Game of Thrones, Daenerys Targaryen decides to go sicko mode and burn the city of King's Landing to the ground after they ring the bells of surrender. This well-written event has led to many fans speculating that Dany or someone else will burn King's Landing at some point in one of the next Song of Ice and Fire novels. But who will it be? In this video, I will go through some of the primary suspects and present the evidence for and against them being the culprit before presenting a theory that I think is most likely. Before I begin, let me preface this video by saying that I am not going to be taking any show-related evidence into account. I will include it as circumstantial stuff, but nothing more. That said, I have an arbitrary hierarchy for ranking sources that is as follows: published canon, preview chapters, semi-canon information, George R.R. Martin's interviews, the shows, interviews about the shows. If you disagree with this decision, please point me to the chapter in the books where Sansa marries Ramsay or where Ellaria kills Doran. Before looking at the list of potential pyromaniacs, we first need to take a look at the factors most likely to ignite the fire. The two that make the most sense are that they will either be lit, the city will be lit ablaze by the dragons, either written by Daenerys or by somebody else, or, more likely, that it will be from the wildfire stashed under King's Landing by King Aerys II. The dragons are pretty straightforward, though their working in tandem with the wildfire is a very real possibility, so let's instead focus on the wildfire. During Robert's Rebellion, Aerys II, Daenerys' and maybe some other characters' father, ordered the pyromancers to place pots of wildfire around King's Landing. And when Tywin marched through the gates and betrayed Aerys, he ordered them to be lit, planning on burning King's Landing and turning it into a massive funeral pyre. "The traitors want my city," I heard him tell Rosart, "but I'll give them naught but ashes. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat. The Targaryens never bury their dead, they burn them. Aerys meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all. Though, if truth be told, I do not believe he truly expected to die. Like Aerion Brightflame before him, Aerys thought the fire would transform him, that he would rise again, reborn as a dragon, and turn all his enemies to ash. But Jaime killed the Mad King and the Pyromancers before they could light the fire, saving the city and earning him the epithet of Kinslayer that haunts him to this day. We know that Jaime's chapters, that there are caches of wildfire spread all across King's Landing. He saw traitors everywhere, and Varys was always there to point out any he might have missed. So his grace commanded his alchemists to place caches of wildfire all over King's Landing, beneath Baelor's Sept and the hovels of Flea Bottom, under stables and storehouses, at all 7 gates, even in the cellars of the Red Keep itself. And in some Tyrion chapters, we see that there's more throughout the city, in caches that were previously unknown, implying that there are more in other key locations. "No, no," Helene squeaked. "The sums are accurate, I swear. We have been, most fortunate, my Lord Hand." Another cache of Lord Rosart's was found, more than 300 jars, under the Dragon Pit. Some whores have been using the ruins to entertain their patrons, and one of them fell through the patch and rotted floor into a cellar. When he felt the jars, he mistook them for wine. He was so drunk that he broke the seal and drank some. In addition to these caches, the Pyromancers pledged 10,000 jars to Cersei for her defense of King's Landing against Stannis. He states that 10,000 jars of wildfire were enough to turn King's Landing into cinders. All through the book, we hear about how dangerous wildfire is, and we explicitly see Tyrion panic at the risk of a fire spreading to the storerooms in the Alchemist Guildhall. "Fire!" a voice screamed from the top of the barbican. "My lords, there's smoke in the city. Flea Bottom's afire." Tyrion was utterly wary, but there was no time for despair. "Bronn, take as many men as you need, and see that their water wagons are not molested. Gods be good, the wildfire. If any blaze should reach that, we can lose all of Flea Bottom if we must, but on no account must the fire reach the Guildhall of the Alchemists. Is that understood?" The wildfire around the city never goes off, but it is used by Cersei and Feast to demolish the Tower of the Hand, which it does in minutes. The risk of wildfire and its distribution around King's Landing is established early and frequently, as early as A Clash of Kings. It is a Chekhov's gun waiting to go off. Now, before I begin on to the theories of who it could be, it's also worth noting that the city could just not burn. While there is a lot of foreshadowing that it will burn, the theories did explode in popularity after the events of Season 8 of the show. And we could all just be misinterpreting the foreshadowing in the books that is there as being for something else. Now on to Daenerys. Between her final passage in A Dance with Dragons, where she hallucinates Viserys and hears a dragon plants no trees, the well-written events of the show, and Dany's whole Legion of Doom vibe of dragons, horse lords, ironborn, and slave soldiers, many fans hold the belief that Dany will be the one to burn King's Landing. However, from a book perspective, there's not much foreshadowing or evidence for this. The two quotes most commonly cited to support this theory are as follows. The common people pray for rain, healthy children, and a summer that never ends, Sir Jorah told her. It is no matter to them if the High Lords play their Game of Thrones, so long as they are left in peace. He gave a shrug. They never are. Dany rode along quietly for a time, working his words like a puzzle box. It went against everything that Viserys had told her, to think that the people could care so little whether a true king or a usurper reigned over them. Yet the more she thought on Jorah's words, the more they rang of truth. What do you pray for, Sir Jorah? She asked him. Home, he said. His voice was thick with longing. I pray for home too, she told him, believing it. Sir Jorah laughed. Look around you then, Khaleesi. But it was not the plains Dany saw then. It was King's Landing and the great red keep that Aegon the Conqueror had built. It was Dragonstone, where she had been born. In her mind's eye they burned with 1,000 lights, a fire blazing in every window. In her mind's eye, all the doors were red. In my opinion, this doesn't do much to support the theory that Dany will burn King's Landing. Two constants throughout the books are fire as warmth and life, particularly against the others, and winter, which was historically deadly for people in non-equatorial climates. And it is especially so in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, due to the winters lasting multiple years. Fire is life up here, said Corran half-hand, but it can be death as well. By his command, they'd risked no open flame since entering the mountains. But never have I felt a dead man shudder as the fire filled him, nor seen his eyes come open. It was not me who raised him, my lady, it was the Lord. For Lore is not done with him yet. Life is warmth, and warmth is fire, and fire is God's, and God's alone. She laughed. Never! The ruby at her throat seemed to pulse, in time with the beating of her heart. The Lord's fire lives within me, Jon Snow. Feel. She put her hand on his cheek and held it there while he felt how warm she was. This is how life should feel, she told him. Only death is cold. They say it grows so cold up here in winter that a man's laughter freezes in his throat and chokes him to death, Ned said evenly. Sam felt the tears welling in his eyes and knew he could not go on much longer. He was the blood of the dragon, but now his fire has gone out. He was Aemon Targaryen, and now his watch has ended. I think the Night's Watch funeral rites are especially interesting given the near-Arctic conditions they face at the Wall, how the Order was established to keep watch for the Long Night and the others returning, and how they're explicitly referring to life as fire in the funeral rites, which, by all accounts, are usually a pretty sacrosanct tradition, and many of the people at the Watch at the time were following the old gods. The Dany quote can just as easily, and in my opinion more easily, be associated with Dany wanting to increase the standard of living since, again, cold is death. This is supported by her saying as much in Clash of Kings. The thought of her home disquieted her. If her son Stars had lived, he would have led his Khalasar across the poison water and swept away her enemies, but his strength had left the world. Her blood riders remained, sworn to her for life and skilled in slaughter, but only in the way of the horse lords. The Dothraki sacked cities and plundered kingdoms. They did not rule them. Dany had no wish to reduce King's Landing to a blackened ruin full of unquiet ghosts. She had supped enough on tears. I want to make my kingdom beautiful, to fill it with fat men and pretty maids and laughing children. I want my people to smile when they see me ride by, the way Viserys said they smiled for my father. She also specifically mentions how she has no wish to reduce King's Landing to a ruin. This could of course be an example of dramatic irony, but I think there is a much more compelling evidence for other characters lighting the fuse that we will get to later on. The other quote seen in support of Dany burning King's Landing appears at the end of A Dance of Dragons, where Dany is probably having a miscarriage and seeing projections and hearing voices in the grass in the Dothraki Sea. The voice was no more than a whisper, yet somehow Dany felt that he was walking just behind her. My bear, she thought, my sweet old bear, who loved me and betrayed me. She had missed him so. She wanted to see his ugly face, to wrap her arms around him and press herself against his chest, But she knew that if she turned around, Ser Jorah would be gone. "I am dreaming," she said. "A waking dream, a walking dream. I am alone and lost." "Lost because you lingered in a place that you were never meant to be," murmured Ser Jorah, as softly as the wind. "Alone because you sent me from your side. You betrayed me, informed on me for gold. For home. Home was all I ever wanted. And me. You wanted me." Dany had seen it in his eyes. "I did," the grass whispered, sadly. "You kissed me. I never said you could, but you did. You sold me to my enemies, but you meant it when you kissed me. I gave you good counsel. Save your spears and swords for the 7 kingdoms, I told you. Leave Meereen to the Meereenese to go west, I said. You would not listen. I had to take Meereen, or see my children starve along the march." Dany could still see the trail of corpses she had left behind her crossing the Red Waste. It was not a sight she wished to see again. "I had to take Meereen to feed my people." "You took Meereen," he told her, "yet you still lingered. To be a queen." "You are a queen," her bear said, "in Westeros." "It is such a long way," she complained. "I was tired, Jorah. I was weary of war. I wanted to rest, to laugh, to paint trees and see them grow. I'm only a young girl." "No, you are the blood of the dragon." The whispering was growing fainter, as if Ser Jorah was falling behind, further behind. "Dragons plant no trees. Remember that. Remember who you are, what you are made to be. Remember your words." "Fire and blood," Daenerys told the swaying grass. A stone turned under her foot. She stumbled to one knee and cried out in pain, hoping against hope that her bear would gather her up and help her to her feet. When she turned her head to look for him, she only saw trickling brown water and the grass, still moving slightly. "The wind," she told herself. "The wind shakes the stalks and makes them sway." Only no wind was blowing. The sun was overhead, the world still and hot. The midges swarmed in the air, and a dragonfly floated over the stream, darting here and there. And the grass was moving when it had no cause to move. She fumbled in the water, found a stone the size of her fist, pulled it from mud, and it was a poor weapon, but better than an empty hand. From the corner of her eye, Dany saw the grass move again, off to her right. The grass swayed and bowed low, as if before a king, but no king appeared to her. The world was green and empty. The world was green and silent. The world was yellow and dying. "I should get up," she told herself. "I have to walk. I have to follow the stream." This can be interpreted to make a much more compelling argument for Dany burning Kale, King's Landing, than the previous quote. However, I still think there's much better evidence for other characters we'll get to later. I also think this whole dream sequence has some very interesting implications, since thematically, Jorah and Viserys, whenever they speak, have no quotation marks, while Daenerys does, implying their thoughts. There's also some other interesting stuff with the glass blowing without wind and hearing whispers, something that's mainly seen associated with the old gods, but that'll be more on in another video. There's also some pretty heavily foreshadowing for the others in the same chapter, which I think is a lot more relevant to why she needs to remember who she is and why she needs to get her ass to Westeros. The next morning, she woke up stiff and sore and aching, with ants crawling all over her arms and legs and face. When she realized what they were, she kicked aside the stalks of dry brown grass that had served as her bed and blanket and struggled to her feet. She had bites all over her, little red bumps, itchy and inflamed. Where did all the ants come from? Dany brushed them from her arms and legs and belly. She ran a hand across her stubby scalp where her hair had burned away and felt more ants on her head and one crawling down the back of her neck. She knocked them off and crushed them under her bare feet. There were so many. It turned out their anthill was on the other side of her wall. She wondered how the ants had managed to climb over it and find her. To them, these tumble-down stones must loom as huge as the wall of Westeros, the biggest wall in all the world. Her brother Viserys used to say, as proud as if he'd built it himself. With this in mind, I think the quotes about fire and blood, remembering that she was made to be, etc., are just encouraging Dany to get her ass to Westeros before it's too late. Unlike in the show, I think Jon, Dany, and her dragons will play a much more important role in stopping the Long Night. The others, being little more than ice zombies, would scale exponentially, meaning the longer you take to beat them, the stronger they would get. She will also hear about them in a few sources before she gets to Westeros, but that's for another video. As for Dany burning King's Landing in the show, I think that comes from the impending conflicts in Yunkai and Volantis, and the other free cities along her path west. Following the Battle for Blood, Dany will likely secure a position in Meereen by attacking the Yunkai. The city will be sacked at best, likely given a worse fate, how she previously gave them leniency in A Sword of Swords, and they very quickly betrayed their agreement in a shock to literally no one. For Volantis, we hear in Tyrion's A Dance with the Dragon chapter that the Red Priests and slaves are awaiting Dany to free them, and that Volantis is sending a force against Daenerys in Meereen by both land and by sea. We also see the following prophecy from a Red Priest in the Tyrion chapter. Tyrion advanced the spearmen. Kava replied with his light horse. Tyrion moved his crossbowmen up a square and said, "The Red Priest outside seems to think the Volantis should fight for the Silver Queen, not against her." "The Red Priests would be wise to hold their tongue," said Kava Nagaris. "Already there has been fighting between their followers and those who worship other gods." Benaro's ranting will only serve to bring a savage wrath down upon his head. "What rantings?" the dwarf asked, toying with his rabble. The Volantine waved a hand. In Volantis, thousands of slaves and freedmen crowd the temple plaza every night to hear Benaro shrieking of bleeding stars and a sword of fire that will cleanse the world. He has been preaching that Volantis will surely burn if the Triarchs take up arms against the Silver Queen. "I am no lady," the widow replied, "just Vergaro's whore. You want to be gone from here before the tigers come. Should you reach your queen, give her a message from the slaves of old Volantis." She touched the faded scar upon her wrinkled cheek, where her tears had been cut away. "Tell her we are waiting. Tell her to come soon." The Red Priest's visions are often true in some regard. The Volantines have already taken up arms against Dany, so I think this cements the conflict is coming to the city, and her being loved by the slaves and the superiority of dragons will guarantee her success, since in Volantis, slaves outnumber the freemen 5-1. I don't think Dany will go as Sucker mode to Volantis as she did to King's Landing in the show, but I do think Volantis will be sacked and conquered, dragon or in a slave revolt, which, as we saw in Meereen, is not a very good place to be in if you're a master. If she only burns a select portion of the city, Volantis is known for having all the old blood, which are the equivalent of masters in the city, in the inner city's black walls. I think Dany could attempt to do the same thing in King's Landing and accidentally explode a secret wildfire stash, which could set off a chain reaction and burn the rest of the city, which, in my opinion, would be the only way she would be the one to burn King's Landing. In addition to Volantis, I think she will do the same conquest and liberation thing in Lys, Myr, Tyrosh, and all the other free cities on the way across the continent, further propagating her reputation as an evil tyrant, sacking and burning cities. And through her narrative, she has purpose to visit Pentos and Bravos, and the rest of the cities are on her way, full of slaves, ripe for liberation. And we already see that Dany's reputation comes off as comically evil, as the Yunkai are spreading a propaganda campaign against her. Wed her or fight her, either way, I will face her soon. The more Quentyn heard of Daenerys Targaryen, the more he feared that meeting. The Yunkai claimed that she fed her dragons on human flesh and bathed in the blood of virgins to keep her skin smooth and supple. Beans laughed at that, but relished the tales of the Silver Queen's promiscuity. One of her captains comes from a line of men where the men have foot-long members, he told them, but even he's not big enough for her. She rode with the Dothraki and grew accustomed to being fucked by stallions, so no man can fill her now. And Books, the clever Volantine swordsman who always seemed to have his nose poked in some crumby skull, thought the Dragon Queen both murderous and mad. Her call had killed her brother to make her queen, then she killed her call to make herself Khaleesi. She practices blood sacrifice, lies as easily as she breathes, turns against her own on her whim. She's broken truces, tortured envoys. Her father was mad too. It runs in the blood. King Aerys II had been mad. All of Westeros knew that. He exiled 2 of his hands and burned a 3rd. If Daenerys is as murderous as her father, must I still marry her? Prince Doran had not spoken of that possibility. And we see the same focus on her being as mad as her father from Mace Tyrell in a small council meeting back in King's Landing. We have these tales coming from the east as well, a second Targaryen and one whose blood no man can question, Daenerys Stormborn. As mad as her father, declared Lord Mace Tyrell. That would be the same father that Highgarde and House Tyrell supported for the bitter end, and well beyond that. Mad she may be, Sir Kevin said, but with so much smoke drifting west, surely there's me some fire burning in the east. We see another example of this in the Arianne 1, the Winds of Winter preview chapter, where she makes some of the same claims about the deaths of Drogo and Viserys being her faults that the Yunkai were making. Everyone says that Prince Rhaegar was beautiful. Was Viserys beautiful as well? I suppose. He was a Targaryen. I never saw the man. The secret pact that Prince Doran had made all those years ago called for Arianne to be wed to Prince Viserys, not Quentyn to Daenerys. It had all come undone on the Dothraki Sea when he was murdered, crowned with a pot of molten gold. He was killed by a Dothraki Khal, said Arianne, the Dragon Queen's own husband. So I've heard. What of it? Just, why did Daenerys let it happen? Viserys was her brother, all that remained of her own blood. The Dothraki are savage folk, who can know why they kill. Perhaps Viserys wiped his arse with the wrong hand. Perhaps, thought Arianne, or perhaps Daenerys realized that once her brother was crowned and wed to me, she'd be doomed to spend the rest of her life sleeping in a tent, smelling like a horse. She is the Mad King's daughter, the princess said. How do we know? We cannot know, said Sir Daemon. We can only hope. To me, I think this completely dispels all the Mad Dany stuff, since we know for a fact that Viserys' death was not her fault, and because Viserys threatened to cut the baby out of her stomach, in the full view of most of Drogo's Khalasar, which is not a very good idea. I think this also really shows that D&D could have taken the surface level claims such as this one being made in universe at face value, something they tended to do a few times. See, the Tywin was not a villain quote. Further in support of this, of Dany not going mad, is the following from San Diego Comic-Con 2006, where George said on a panel that he regretted that Cersei and Daenerys would not be contrasted directly together. Now, Cersei, while being one of my favorite characters, is admittedly not a very good ruler or a person, as made evident by her liberal use of torture, questionable record as Queen Regent, and her habit of making things up to get mad about and then getting really mad about them. So for Dany, no, I don't think she intentionally burns King's Landing. While she could do it on accident if she doesn't know about the wildfire and some type of the sins of the daughter, the sins of the father type beat. But I don't really think that'll happen, since I don't think King's Landing is going to be standing by the time she makes it to Westeros. Now, more on that in the following bits. Next up on our list of suspects is going to be anyone who steals a dragon. This is primarily referring to Euron, Greyjoy, Victarion Greyjoy, and Brown Ben Plum. Euron and Victarion because of the dragon horn they have, and Brown Ben Plum because he is a Targaryen through Aegon IV and Aelena Targaryen, claiming him as the heir of the Lord Plum, and one of his ancestors, that is. So we see in Daenerys 4, A Song of A Storm of Swords, that Brown Ben Plum gets a favorable reaction from her dragon, saying that the white dragon landed awkwardly with one foot on the man's head and one on his shoulder, shrieked, and flew off again. He likes you, Ben, said Dany. And well, he might, Brown Ben laughed. I have me a drop of the dragon blood myself, you know. Now, none of these three people are shown to be particularly good people. Victarion and Euron are both Ironborn, which means they're comically evil and spend all of their books they're in committing various atrocities. While Brown Ben Plum is just a sellsword, and one noted by Tyrion for being particularly greedy. And Tyrion also promises him a ton of gold and a lordship. And now the debt is to be paid when Tyrion is named the Lord of Casterly Rock, a position that Tyrion likely won't be in for the foreseeable future. But if Brown Ben Plum had a dragon, he wouldn't have to have it given to him, he could take it. Now, who would he take it from? The Lannisters in control at King's Landing. In which case, he could just burn the city down. For some reason. For the Ironborn, they're just Ironborn. They rarely have personalities beyond a love for reaving and pillaging across the world. Euron is invading Old Town, so he's shown to have no qualms with sacking cities, while Victarion helped take the Shield Islands. Euron claims he wants to sit the Iron Throne, in which if he wants to do that, he'd have to conquer King's Landing. And he really doesn't seem to be the type to care about collateral damage. Now, I don't think any of these three would be the ones to burn King's Landing, since personally, I think and hope the dragon horn doesn't work, since conceptually, a horn that's anyone tame a dragon is super dumb. See the Company of the Cat video on the topic for more information. And I don't think Ben is a major enough character to get a dragon for himself. If I had to rate them in order from least to most likely to burn King's Landing, I would say Victarion is least likely, followed by Ben, and then Euron, with Euron in the lead by a large margin. Next up, we've got Jon Connington. Now, Jon Con is a very interesting character who was introduced in A Dance with Dragons. He contracts Grayscale, saving Tyrion and the Sorrows, which effectively puts his life on a timer until he goes mad or dies. Now, Jon Con is aware of this, as he says in his first POV. Death, he knew, but slow. I still have time. A year, 2 years, 5. Some stone men live for 10. Time enough to cross the sea, to see Griffin's Roost again, to end the usurper's line for good, and put Rhaegar's son upon the Iron Throne. Then, Lord Jon Connington could die content. Connington also goes on to lament on his failures of killing Robert at the Battle of the Stony Sept during Robert's Rebellion, where we, the reader, find out that he's been lost in a sea of guilt ever since. He regrets showing mercy and how he hadn't wanted to be named a butcher. Burn them all is specifically invoked, and he swears he would do better if given the chance again. For years afterward, Jon Connington told himself that he was not to blame, that he had done all that any man could do. His soldiers searched every hole in the hovel. He offered pardons and rewards. He took hostages and hung them in crow cages, and swore they would have neither food nor drink until Robert was delivered to him, all to no avail. Tywin Lannister himself could have done no more. He had insisted one night to Blackheart during his first year of exile. That is where you're wrong, Miles Schwerner had replied. Lord Tywin would not have bothered with a search. He would have burned that town, every living creature in it. Men and boys, babes at the breast, noble knights and holy septons, pigs and whores, rats and rebels, he would have burned them all. When the fire guttered out and the only ash or cinders remained, he would have sent his men to find the bones of Robert Baratheon. Later, when Stark and Tully turned up with their hosts, he would have offered pardons to the both of them, and they would have accepted and turned for their home with tails between their legs. He was not wrong, Jon Connington reflected, leaning on the battlements of his forebears. I wanted the glory of slaying Robert in single combat, and I did not want the name of Butcher. So Robert escaped me and cut down Rhaegar on the Trident. I failed the father, he said, but I will not fail the son. This establishes Jon Con as both being on a clock, potentially going mad, willing to do anything to ensure Fagon sits the throne, and establishing a desire to end Robert's line. Legitimate or not. It's also worth noting that Season 8, Episode 5 of HBO's Game of Thrones is titled The Bells. While Jon Con stews over the Battle of the Bells, I won't lean too heavily on it, but again, something worth noting. Jon Con's ruthlessness and desire to be like Tywin are established. Now, what are Tywin's most ruthless acts? The destruction of the Rains and Tarbecks during the Rebellion, his brutal campaign on the Riverlands during the War of the Five Kings, and the sack of King's Landing, which resulted in the death of Elia, Rhaenys, and allegedly Aegon. Of these three acts, Fagon has the most connection with the final one, given that it was his mother and sister who were allegedly killed. And the whole ending the usurper's line thing fits in there too. So, I could see Jon Con trying and killing something, and killing any of Cersei's children who he could get his hands on when they attacked King's Landing in a brutal sack, same as the Old Testament blood and cheese type something of a son for a son. But more on this later. Now, Jon Con deciding to be evil and just burning King's Landing would not be good writing in my opinion, just as it was when Dany did it in the show. Madness is a symptom of grayscale, yes, but it'll be years before it will manifest. But he could still be at fault, just accidentally. If a fire is lit during the assault on the city and hits a wildfire stockpile, then again, he could just see Fagon be cut down during the assault, hear the bells ringing, and decide he'll spread grayscale day one and then burn everything down. I feel like Jon Con himself won't be the one to burn down King's Landing, but he is definitely going to be playing a massive part in it. Our last subject is Cersei, who, in my opinion, is the most likely to burn it all down. To begin, she's compared to both Wildfire and Ares constantly, which has some pretty obvious implications. There are literally too many examples for me to list them all, but here are some of my favorites. I will post a link with some more examples compiled in the description below. Frustrated, Ares turned to the wisdoms of the ancient guild of alchemists, who knew the secret of producing the volatile jade-green substance known as Wildfire, said to be a close cousin to Dragonflame. The pyromancers became a regular fixture at his court, as the king's fascination with the fire grew. By 280 AC, Ares II had taken to burning traitors, murderers, and plotters, rather than hanging them or beheading them. The king seemed to take great pleasure in these fiery executions, which were presided over by Wisdom Rosart, the Grand Master of the Guild of Alchemists, so much that he granted Rosart the title of Lord and gave him a seat upon the small council. The sight had filled him with disquiet, reminding him of Aerys Targaryen, and the way of burning would arouse him. The king had no secrets from his Kingsguard. Relation between Aerys and his queen had been strained during the last years of his reign. They slept apart and did their best to avoid each other during the waking hours. But whenever Aerys gave her man to the flames, Queen Rhaella would have a visitor in the night. Cersei thought of all of the king's hands that had gone she had known throughout the years. Owen Merryweather, Jon Connington, Carlton Chelston, Jon Arryn, Eddard Stark, her brother Tyrion, and her father. Lord Tywin, her father most of all. All of them are burning now, she told herself, savoring the thought. They are dead and burning, every one. With all their plots and schemes and betrayals, it is my day now. It is my castle and my kingdom. Cersei felt too alive to sleep. The wildfire was cleansing her, burning away all her rage and fear, filling her with resolve. The flames are so pretty. I want to watch them for a while. Jaime knew the look in his sister's eyes. He had seen it before, most recently on the night of Tommen's wedding, when she had burned the Tower of the Hand. The green light of the wildfire had bathed the faces of the watchers, so they looked like nothing so much as rotting corpses. A pack of gleeful ghouls, but some of the corpses were prettier than others. Even in the baleful glow, Cersei had been beautiful to look upon. She stood with one hand on her breast, her lips parted, her green eyes shining. She was crying, Jaime had realized, but whether it was from grief or ecstasy she could not have said. The sight had filled him with disquiet, reminding him of Aerys Targaryen and the way the burning would arouse him. Note how it's Jaime explicitly making the connection here. In 265 AC, offended by the stink of King's Landing, he, Aerys II, spoke of building a white city entirely of marble on the south bank of the Blackwater Rush. Would that we could do the same for the rest of this foul castle, said Cersei. After the war, I mean to build a new palace beyond the river. She had dreamed of it the night before last. A magnificent white castle surrounded by woods and gardens, long leaves away from the stinks and noise of King's Landing. So that was a lot. I think a few of those are way too obvious and explicit to be coincidences. The parts where Cersei is explicitly compared to Aerys by Jaime, and how both wanted to build a new white castle or city on the opposite side of the Blackwater Rush, seems very intentional, a comparison. In addition to the Aerys parallels, she's compared to Wildfire a lot. Of the 63 times Wildfire is mentioned in the 5 main books, plus the preview chapters, Cersei is compared to it a total 3 times, is directly related to it when it's mentioned 11 times, and is mentioned in the same paragraph as it 12 times. And she doesn't really seem to grasp how delicate and dangerous it is, not caring about how it's stored and letting the decrepit Alchemist Guild oversee its use and its storage. Jaime ignored that. If these flames spread beyond the tower, you may end up burning down the castle, whether you mean to or not. Wildfire is treacherous. Lord Hallen has assured me that his pyromancers can control the fire. The Guild of Alchemists is brewing fresh wildfire for a fortnight. Let all of King's Landing see the flames. It would be a lesson to our enemies. Now you sound like Aerys. Now, the comparisons between Cersei and Wildfire exist going all the way back to A Clash of Kings, when Wildfire was first introduced. The hand speaks with a king's voice. Candlelight gleamed green as wildfire in Cersei's eyes. If we send you, Tyrion, it will be as if Joffrey went himself, and who better? You wield words as skillfully as Jaime wields a sword. Cersei beckoned her page for another cup of wine, a golden vintage from the arbor, fruity and rich. The queen was drinking heavily, but the wine only seemed to make her more beautiful. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes had a bright, feverish heat to them as she looked down over the hall. Eyes of wildfire, Sansa thought. 7 save us all, you do. His sister liked to think of herself as tying with teats, but she was wrong. Their father had been relentless and as implacable as a glacier, where Cersei was all wildfire, especially when thwarted. Note the especially when thwarted claim from Jaime. Let's think back to what Aerys tried to do during Robert's Rebellion when Rhaegar fought the Trident and the rebel hosts were marching on King's Landing. When he was thwarted, Aerys had attempted to burn down King's Landing to unite to his enemies, giving them nothing but charred bones and cooked meat. Now, Cersei herself seems to place quite a lot of value on only a few things in her life. Herself, her children, Jaime, and power. All of those are obviously going to be threatened by Fagon on his quest for the throne, since she's definitely not typed to just bend the knee to him. Cersei does love her children in her own fucked up narcissistic way. She also fears for them, having nightmares about their deaths on a pretty often basis. A dream. That's all it was, a dream. I drank too much last night. These fears are only humors born of wine. I will be the laughing one. Come dusk, my children will be safe. Tommen's throne will be secure, and my twisted little Valancourt will be short ahead and rotting. It proves a waste of breath, as ever. The gods were deaf. Cersei dreamt that she was down in the black cells once again. Only this time it was her chained to the wall in place of the singer. She was naked, and blood dripped from the tips of her breast where the imp had torn out her nipples with his teeth. Please, she begged. Please, not my children. Do not harm my children. Tyrion only leered at her. He was naked too, covered with coarse hair that made him look more like a monkey than a man. You shall see them crowned, he said, and you shall see them die. Then he took her bleeding breast into her mouth and began to suck, and pain sawed through her like a hot knife. Any mother would do the same to protect her children, said Cersei. When do you mean to bring that boy of yours to court? Russell was his name. He could train a Tommen. The prophecy she fears is from a witch, who also happens to just be Jane Westwing's ancestor, at Lannisport, who told her this after drinking her blood at a young age. Aye, queen you shall be, until there comes another, younger and more beautiful, to cast you down and take all that you hold dear. Oh, aye, 6 and 10 for him, and 3 for you. Gold shall be their crowns, and gold shall be their shrouds, she said. And when your tears have drowned you, the Valancourt shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you. The 6 and 10 refers to Robert's numerous bastards, and it implies her children shall all be crowned and die before she's murdered by her Valancourt, which means little brother in High Valyrian. Joffrey was king, he's already dead. Tommen is currently king, and Myrcella was crowned through Arianne's plot and feast, which could also count as being queen and wearing a crown. Now, Cersei is convinced that the Valancourt is Tyrion, which is one of the main reasons she's going to treat him for as long as he has. But a ton of other theories suggest it will be Jaime, namely because it's a 10th grade example of dramatic irony, and also the aforementioned Ares parallels. It's also worth noting that in the official tie-in game, Game of Thrones Reigns, it's released between season 7 and 8, Cersei is explicitly referred to as the Mad Queen, and her character is unlocked by a plot heavily involving wildfire. My theory is that we will get a double feature where it's both Jon Con and Cersei responsible for Kingslanding going up in flames. Whether it's through Jon Con's ruthlessness, Cersei's grief and madness, or just a poor fated attempt to root them out, Kingslanding is going to be burned, and it's going to be both of their faults. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, we learn that Nymeria and Tyene Sand, 2 of the oldest and deadliest of Prince Oberyn Martell's daughters, who died trying to avenge his sister and killed Gregor Clegane at the end of Storm of Swords, are heading towards King's Landing. Nymeria is to join the small council in her father's place, and Tyene is to infiltrate the Great Sept. Both are pretty pissed about their father's death, and how Doran hasn't raised spears in revolt yet. For Oberyn's death, or for Aegon's alleged mother and Doran and Oberyn's sister, Elia Martell, who had died 17 years earlier. He went beyond anything I asked of him. Take the measure of the boy king in council and make note of their strengths and weaknesses. I told him on the terrace. We were eating oranges. Find us, friends, if there are any to be found. Learn what you can of Elia's end, but see that you do not provoke Lord Tywin unduly. Those were my words to him. Oberyn laughed and said, When have I provoked any man unduly? You would do better to warn the Lannisters against provoking me. He wanted justice for Elia, but he would not wait. He waited 10 and 7 years, the Lady Nym broke in. Were it you that they killed, my father would have led the banners north before your corpse was cold. Were it you, the spears would be falling thick as rain upon the marches now. I do not doubt it. No more than you shout this, my prince. My sisters and I will not wait 10 and 7 years for our vengeance. She put her spurs into the mare and she was off, galloping toward Sunspirit, with her tail in hot pursuit. When Illyria's Sand comes and preaches for peace and not continuing to perpetuate the cycle of violence and revenge, this is Nymeria's response. What would you have us do, my lady? Asked Lady Nym. Should we lay down our spears and smile and forget all the wrongs that had been done to us? Prince Doran does eventually convince them to swear an oath on their father's grave, where they swear they will obey him and not strike. But what happens when one or both of them learn that Sir Robert Strong of the Kingsguard is actually Gregor Clegane's corpse? It's not too much of a stretch to say it would not go over very well. While we don't have any information on Tyenne's transportation methods, we know that Nymeria is set to join Sir Balon Swan and the Kingsguard on their return to King's Landing, along with 3 knights, 8 squires, and their retainers, on his return trip alongside Myrcella. Now, Doran and the Sand Snakes believe that this return trip was meant to be a trap, where Doran's youngest son, Trystane, was to be killed on the command of Cersei. Prince Doran took a jagged breath. Doran still has friends at court. Friends who tell us things we're not meant to know. This invitation of Cersei sent us as a ruse. Trystane is never meant to reach King's Landing. On the road back, someone in the Kingswood, Sir Balon's party will be attacked by outlaws and my son will die. I am asked to court only so that I may witness the attack with my own eyes and thereby absolve the queen of any blame. Oh, and these outlaws? They will be shouting, half man, as they attack. Sir Balon may even catch a glimpse of the imp, though no one else will. Their plan to avoid this is to stall, with Sir Balon joining Obarra and Ariel Hota on their trip to kill Darkstar, who attacked Myrcella and is being blamed for killing Aerys Oakheart as well during Arianne's ill-fated attempt to crown her queen. This should draw them several moons. Now, Tyene is known for her expertise in poisons, her beauty, and her innocent looks. Once she makes it to King's Landing, her association with the Faith would give her a front row seat to see Robert Strong oppose the Faith's champion in Cersei's trial by combat. And what if, seeing her father's killer alive, she decides her vow is no longer valid? Her connection to the Faith would give her some influence, and let her sneak into places she otherwise wouldn't, which could lead to her poisoning Tommen. After Tommen died and his death was made public knowledge, what would be stopping Nymeria and the Dornish from turning on their people in their retinue and capturing Myrcella and Sir Balon, the knights and their squires, and then defecting to the Golden Company and the Targaryens with them? In their capture would be the current Baratheon queen, Myrcella. And given the knowledge of Cersei potentially plotting against them, I think they would be more than willing to do so if they knew what was happening. From this, Jon Con's desire to end the usurper's line comes into play. This could lead to Myrcella's execution, Missandei style, as Cersei watches helplessly from the balcony of the end of the walls, watching as her last children is dead and her prophecies were fulfilled. Now, I think Myrcella could also potentially be the younger and more beautiful queen that Cersei heard mentioned in the prophecy. Since Cersei would be waiting for her to come, she is currently the reigning queen, is younger than Cersei, and is explicitly stated to have been all of Cersei's beauty and none of her personality. And Cersei also has lost her beauty and is said to be aging and gaining weight. Her beauty was shown away from her prior to her walk of atonement through King's Landing in a dance. Now, with Myrcella's death, the last of Robert's legal children and the last remaining Baratheon claim to the throne are dead. This will be some justification that some of the inhabitants of King's Landing would use to start rebelling. They would either be inspired by Varys' plans, or just organically, since they're already pretty unhappy with the throne because of other issues, including their support for the Red Wedding, and throw open the gate, giving Fagon his mother's dragon bit of being cheered that Dany foresaw in her House of the Undying Visions, and Cersei would go on to decide to detonate the wildfire stockpiles, either in a full-blown Aerys deny them the throne, or deny them the city thing, or just try and be selective with it and just blow them up around where they are to try and stop them. One of the things I think the show got right is that Jaime won't kill Cersei. He will run to her after he finds out the threat of the Golden Company. After he finishes doing whatever he's doing with Lady Stoneheart and Brienne in the Riverlands, he dodges through the siege lines, sneaks into King's Landing, and in his last moments either sees Cersei ordering the explosions or breaking down crying. If the latter happens, then Jaime will hold Cersei in their dying embrace, leaving the world as they came into it together. His middle hand, pale from tarnish and ash, resting around her neck as the keep burns around them, and the dust, smoke, and debris choke the life from both of them. Fagon and Jon Con and the bulk of the Golden Company all die here, as would Cersei, the rest of the Lannister Baratheon claimants, and potentially every piece of legitimacy claimed by Aegon II during the Dance of the Dragons, which are the Conqueror's Crown, his sword Blackfire, the Iron Throne, and King's Landing itself. All would be destroyed. and with it the unity of 7 kingdoms right before the second long night. How long the darkness endured, no man can say, but all agree that it was only when a great warrior, known variously as Hyrukin the Hero, Azor Ahai, Yntar, Nefarion, and Eldrick Shadowchaser, arose to give courage to the race of men and lead the virtuous in the battle. With his blazing sword Lightbringer, the darkness was put to rout, and light and love returned once more to the world. Yet the great empire of the dawn was not reborn, for the restored world was a broken place, where every tribe of men went its own way, fearful of all others, and war and lust and murder endured, even to our present day, or so the men and women of the further east believe. That quote implies that the Seven Kingdom would be kaput after a long night. The realm was in a state of civil war for most of the past 2 decades. The long night is going to be longer than a single battle at Winterfell, and will have drastic consequences on the north and any kingdom it spreads into. And all the symbols of unity in Westeros and any of its institutions supporting it would have been melted away in wildfire, in a battle between 2 of the last claimants of the Baratheon and the Targaryens. This would pave a way for a world where Bran can rule from the shadows through the weirwoods, a king in all but name, and the last thing that would remain of the old Targaryen legacy would be the Iron Throne, forged by the heat of Balerion's flames, and thus somehow able to survive the wildfire's less hot flames, leaving it as an Ozymandian monument to what came before, in otherwise antique and disordered ruin. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing besides me remains. For under the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. Now, you may be wondering, what would the point be here? In addition to destroying King's Landing, changing that plot drastically, ending Cersei, Jaime, Jon Con, probably a few other POVs as well, anyone else who was in King's Landing, it would also make Dany sad. It's worth noting that the scene as follows, pretty explicitly foreshadows that Fagon will die before he gets to Daenerys and without a dragon. I told you, I know our little queen. Let's hear that her brother Rhaegar's murdered son is still alive, and that this brave boy has raised the dragon standard of her forebears in Westeros once again, that he is fighting a desperate war to avenge his father and reclaim the Iron Throne for House Targaryen, hard-pressed on every side. And she will fly to your side, as fast as winds and water can carry her. You are the last of her line, and this mother of dragons, this breaker of chains, is above all a rescuer. The girl who drowned the slaver cities in blood, rather than leave strangers to their chains, can scarcely abandon her brother's son in his hour of peril. When she reaches Westeros and meets you for the first time, she will see you as equals man and woman, not queen supplicant. How can she help but love you then? I ask. Smiling, he sees the dragon and flute across the board. I hope your grace will pardon me. Your king is trapped. Death in 4. The prince stared at the playing board. My dragon is too far away to save you. You should have moved her to the center of the battle. Note that Wildfire was previously called a cousin of Dragonflame, and the quote by Jaime where he said that he thought Aerys thought that he would be reborn as a dragon in the Wildfire. Now, Tyrion's description of Daenerys feels pretty apt. A family and a home are all things that she desperately wants, but instead she will liberate Essos first, and then come to her family in Aegon. She could arrive here by thinking that the same process that Fagon was at. She could see the window to end slavery while the sellswords in cities were weak, or she could just do it because the free cities are there on her way west, and she decides she wanted to finish it before they can prepare to defend her, or just thinks that maybe she won't get around to doing it again after she settles in Westeros. Regardless, if Fagon dies before she meets him, she would be devastated. She would have a brief hope that she was not the last of her Targaryen, and then her hopes would be destroyed. Another piece of evidence for Fagon dying before he meets Dany is in this one, where he explicitly rejects going to her and her dragons in favor of the strength of the Golden Company and his supporters. There's the land route, suggested Franklin Fowlers. The Demon Road is death. We will lose half the company in desertion if we attempt that march, and bury half of those who remain beside the road. It gives me to say it, but Magister Illyrio and his friends may have been unwise to put so much help on this child queen. No, thought Griff, but they were most unwise to put their hopes on you. And then Prince Aegon spoke. Then put your hopes on me, he said. Daenerys is Prince Rhaegar's sister, but I am Rhaegar's son. I am the only dragon you need. Now, George R. R. Martin once said that the only thing worth writing about is human conflict, is a human heart in conflict with itself. And would Dany be weighing duty and desire to free men, women, and children from the bondage of slavery, not be in conflict with her desire for home and family, something that Daenerys has been dreaming of since the first book? That's for you to decide. And if we ever get our hands on the Winds of Winter, we can see how true this is. Thank you for watching. This is my first Song of Ice and Fire video, and as you can see, the editing's pretty bad. Vegas is hard to use. So, I got a few more scripts lined up going over a few other topics I think are going to be interesting. Now, if you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe. Leave comments, questions, if you agree or disagree with me, anything else you want me to take a look at. Alright, hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.